Elon Musk, Chapter 24, The SWAT Team, Tesla, 2006 to 2008. Antonio Garcia and Tim Watson. Roadster costs. Designing a car is easy, Musk often said. The difficult part is manufacturing it. After the prototype of the Roadster was unveiled in July 2006, the hard part began. The target cost of the Roadster had originally been about $50,000, but then Musk design changes as well as massive problems finding the right transmission system. By November 2006, the cost had swelled to $83,000. That prompted Musk to do something unusual for a board chair. He flew to England to visit Lotus, the chassis supplier, without telling Martin Eberhard, his CEO. I find this a rather awkward situation where Elon has asked for Lotus' own view of the production timing. One of the Lotus executives wrote Eberhard. Musk got an earful in England. Then the Lotus team, which was dealing with rapidly shifting design specifications from Tesla, said that there was no way that they could start producing Roadster bodies until the end of 2007, at least 8 months behind schedule. They presented him with a list of more than 800 problems that had arisen. For example, there was a problem with the British company that Tesla had contracted to supply the customized carbon fiber panels, fenders, and doors. It was Friday, and Musk impulsively decided to visit the supplier. I hiked through the mud to this building, where I saw the Lotus guys were right. The body tooling wasn't working, he says. It was a total failure. By the end of July 2007, the financial situation had worsened. The cost of materials for the first round of production had estimated to be $110,000 per car, and the company was projected to run out of cash within weeks. That's when Musk decided to call in a SWAT team. Antonio Gracias. Well, when Antonio Gracias was 12 years old, he asked for some Apple computer for Christmas. Not the computer itself. He already had an early Apple II. He wanted the company's stock. His mother, who ran a small lingerie store in Grand Rapids, Michigan, spoke only Spanish, but she managed to buy him 10 shares for $300. He still owns them. They are now worth $490,000. Among his first business ventures, while a student at Georgetown University, was buying condoms in bulk and shipping them to a friend to Russia to sell. That ended up not working well, so he had a huge inventory of condoms in his dorm room. He put them in boxes, sold advertising on the boxes, and distributed them at bars and fraternities. He got a job at Goldman Sachs in New York, but quit to go to the University of Chicago Law School. Most law students, especially at a place like Chicago, find the work all-consuming. But Gracias, was bored. On the side, he started a venture fund that bought small companies. One of them seemed particularly promising, a California firm that did electroplating, but it turned out to be a mess. Gracias found himself commuting to California to try to fix things at the factory, while a friend at law school named David Sachs took notes for him in class. Remember these names, Antonio Gracias and David Sachs, because they will reemerge in the Twitter saga. Because Gracias spoke Spanish, like most of the factory workers, he was able to learn from them where the problems were. I realized that if you invest in a company, you should spend all your time on the shop floor, he says. When he asked how they could speed things up, one of the workers explained that having smaller vats for the nickel baths would make the plant go faster. These and other worker-generated ideas succeeded so well that the factory began turning a profit, and Gracias started buying more troubled companies. He learned one very big lesson from these ventures. It's not the product that leads to success. It's the ability to make the product efficiently. It's about building the machine that builds the machine. In other words, how do you design the factory? It was a guiding principle that Musk would make his own. After law school, David Sachs had gone on to be co-founder with Musk at PayPal. Gracias was an investor, and he and Musk were among the new millionaires who went to Las Vegas to celebrate Sachs' 30th birthday in May 2002. 6 of the partygoers were in a limousine when one of them, a friend from Stanford, threw up in the back seat. When the driver got them to the hotel, most of the others took off. Elon and I looked at each other. So we can't leave the poor driver with vomit in his car, Gracias recalls. So they drove with the driver to an 7-Eleven convenience store, bought paper towels and spray cleaner, and cleaned up the car. Elon has Asperger's, Gracias says, so he sometimes comes across as not emotional, but he actually can care. Gracias and his venture capital firm, Valor Management, participated in 4 of Tesla's early funding rounds, and in May 2007 he joined the board. That was just when Musk was fathoming the depth of the production problems with the Roadster, and he asked Gracias to figure out what was wrong. For help, Gracias called on an eccentric partner who was a wizard at understanding factories, Tim Watkins. After receiving his electroplating company, Gracias found some similar companies, including one that had a small factory in Switzerland. When he flew there to inspect it, he was picked up at the airport by a ponytailed British robotics engineer named Tim Watkins, who was wearing a black t-shirt, jeans, and a black fanny pack. Whenever he took a new assignment, he would go to a local chain store and buy a 10-pack of t-shirts and jeans, which he would then shed like a molting lizard during his stay. After a leisurely dinner, Watkins suggested that they go look at the factory. Gracias knew that it did not have a permit to run at night shift, so he was wary when Watkins and the plant manager drove him to the back alley of an industrial park. I thought for a moment that they might rob me, Gracias admits. Watkins, with a flair for drama, threw open the back door. The lights were out and it was pitch black, but there were sounds of high-speed stamping machines working where Watkins turned on the lights. Gracias realized that they were whirling on their own with no workers on the premises. Swiss regulations decreed that workers could be on duty no more than 16 hours per day. So Watkins had instituted a schedule of 2 8-hour shifts separated by 4-hour periods when machines would run on their own. He devised a formula that predicted when every part of the process would need human invention. We could get 24 hours of productions for 16 hours of labor each day, he said. Gracias made Watkins a partner in his firm, and they became soulmates, even rooming together as they developed a shared vision of how to swoop into the manufacturing companies and make them efficient. And that's what they set out to do for the Musk and Tesla in 2007. The supply chain problem. The first task was to deal with the problem involving the British supplier of the carbon fiber panels, fenders, and doors. After Musk's visit to the company, he had some heated exchanges with its managers. A few months later, they called and said they were giving up. They couldn't deal with his demands, and they were canceling their contract. As soon as Musk got the news, he called Watkins in Chicago. "I'm getting in my plane. I will pick you up in Chicago, and we'll sort this out," he said. In England, they packed some of the machinery into the plane and flew it to France, where another company, Sotara Composites, had agreed to take on the work. Musk was worried that workers in France were not as dedicated as he was, so he gave them a pep talk. "Please don't strike or go on vacation right now, or Tesla will die," he pleaded. After dinner at Laurel Valley Chateau, he left Watkins behind to teach the French how to work with carbon fiber and make the production lines efficient. The problem with the body panels prompted Musk to worry about other parts of the supply chain. So he asked Watkins to sort out the entire system. What he found was a nightmare. The process began in Japan, where the cells for the lithium-ion batteries were made. 70 of these cells were glued together to form bricks, which were then shipped to a makeshift factory in the jungles of Thailand that once made barbecue grills. There they were assembling into a battery pack with a web of tubes as a cooling mechanism. These would not be flown by airplane. So these could not be flown by airplane, so they were shipped by boat. So to England and driven to the Lotus factory, where they were assembled into the Roadster chassis. The body panels came from the new supplier in France. Excuse me. The bodies, which batteries would be then shipped across the Atlantic and through the Panama Canal to the Tesla assembly facility near Palo Alto, where a team was in charge of the funnel assembly, including the AC propulsion motor and drivetrain. By the time the battery cells made their way into the customer's car, they had traveled around the world. They presented not just a logistics nightmare, but also a cash flow problem. Each cell at the beginning of the journey cost $1.50. With labor, a full battery pack of 9,000 cells cost $15,000. Tesla had to pay them up front, but it would be 9 months before those packs made it around the world and would be sold in a car to consumers. Other parts going into a long supply process likewise burn cash. Outsourcing may save money, but it can hurt cash flow. Compounding the problem was the design of the car, partly because of Musk's fiddling had gotten too complex. It was just a flat-out burning dumpster fire of stupidity, Musk later admitted. The chassis had become 40% heavier and had to be redesigned to fit the battery pack, which invalidated the crash testing Lotus had done. In retrospect, it would have been much smarter to start with the clean sheet design and not try to modify the Lotus Elise, he said. As for the drive team, almost none of the AC propulsion technology turned out to be viable for a production car. We screwed the pooch 6 ways to Sunday, Musk says. When Watkins got to Tesla's California headquarters to sort through the mess with Eberhard, he was shocked to discover that there were no bill of materials for the production of the Roadster. In other words, there were no comprehensive record of every part that went into the car and how much Tesla was paying for each. Eberhard explained that he was trying to move to a SAP system to manage such information, but he didn't have a chief financial officer to organize the transition. You can't manufacture a product without a bill of materials, Watkins told him. There are tens of thousands of comments on a vehicle, and you are getting pecked to death by ducks. When Watkins pieced together the true costs, he realized things were worse than even the most pessimistic projections. The initial Roadster off the assembly line would cost, including overhead, at least $140,000. It would not fall much below $120,000, even after production increased. Even if they sold the car for $100,000, they would be hemorrhaging money. Watkins and Gracias presented the grim findings to Musk. The cash-sucking supply chain and the cost of the car would bleed the company of all its money, including the deposits that had been made by customers to receive a Roadster before it would even begin selling the car at scale. It was, Watkins says, an oh shit moment. Gracias pulled Musk aside later. This is not going to work, he said. Eberhard is not being for real about the numbers. Chapter 25, Taking the Wheel. Tesla 2007 to 2008. Eberhard's oyster. Soon after he learned about Musk's secret trip to England, Eberhard asked him to dinner in Palo Alto. Let's start a search to find someone who can replace me, he said. Later, Musk would be brutal about him, but that evening he was supportive. Nobody will be able to take from you the importance of what you've done by being a founder of the company, he said. At a board meeting the next day, Eberhard described his plan to take a step aside, and everyone approved. The search for a successor went slowly, mainly because Musk was not satisfied with any of the candidates. Tesla's sheer number of problems was so high that it was nearly impossible to try to find a decent CEO, Musk says. It's hard to find a buyer for a house that's on fire. By July 2007, they had not come close to finding one. That is when Gracias and Watkins came in with their report and Musk's mood changed. Musk called a meeting of the Tesla board for early August 2007. What's your best estimate for the cost of the car, he asked Eberhard. When Musk launches into such a grilling, it's not likely to end happily. Eberhard had trouble giving a precise answer, and Musk became convinced that he was lying. It's a word Musk uses a lot, often rather loosely. He lied to me and said the cost would be no problem, Musk says. That's slanderous, Eberhard responds when I quote Musk's accusations. I wouldn't lie to anybody. Why would I do that? The true cost is going to come out eventually. His voice rises in anger, but there's an undertone of pain and sorrow. He cannot figure out why Musk, after 15 years, is still so fervent about disparaging him. This is the richest man in the world beaten on somebody who can't touch him. His original partner, Mark Tarpenning, admits that they badly miscalculated the pricing, but he defends Eberhard against Musk's allegations of lying. Certainly it wasn't deliberate, he says. We were dealing with the pricing information that we had. We weren't lying. A few days after the board meeting, Eberhard was on his way to a conference in Los Angeles when his phone rang. It was Musk who informed him that he was being ousted as CEO immediately. It was like getting hit by a brick on the side of the head. Something I'd never saw coming, said Eberhard, who should have seen it coming. Even though he had suggested the search for a new CEO, he did not expect to be unceremoniously ousted before one was found. They had a meeting without me to vote me off the island. He tried to reach some board members, but none would take his call. It was an unanimous board agreement that Martin had to go, including the members Martin had put on the board. Musk says Turpinning soon left as well. Eberhard launched a little website called Tesla Founders Blog, where he vented his frustrations about Musk and accused the company of trying to root out and destroy any of its heart that might still be beating. Board members asked him to tone it down, which didn't work, and then Tesla's lawyer threatened to withdraw his stock options, which did. There are certain people who occupy a demon's corner of Musk's headspace. They trigger him, turn him dark, and rouse a cold anger. His father is number one, but somewhat oddly, Martin Eberhard, who is hardly a household name, is second. Getting involved with Eberhard was the worst mistake I ever made in my career, Musk says. Musk unleashed a barrage of attacks on Eberhard in the summer of 2008, as Tesla's productions woes mounted, and Eberhard responded by suing him for libel. Musk had set out to rewrite history. The lawsuit began. He still bristles at Musk's accusations that he lied. What the fuck, he says. The company that Mark and I started turned him into the richest man in the world. Isn't that enough already? They finally reached an uneasy legal settlement in 2009 in which they agreed not to disparage each other and that henceforth both of them would be referred to as co-founders of Tesla, along with J.B. Straubel, Mark Tarpenning, and Ian Wright. In addition, Eberhard got a roadster, which he had been promised. They each then issued statements about the other that they did not believe. Despite the non-disparaging clause, Musk would not be able to stop himself from bursting out in anger every few months. In 2019, he tweeted, Tesla is alive in spite of Eberhard, but he seeks credit constantly and fools give it to him. The following year, he declared, he is literally the worst person I've ever worked with. Then in late 2021, founding story of Tesla, as portrayed by Eberhard, is patently false. I wish I had never met him. That's deep. Michael Marks in the Asshole Questions. Musk should have learned by this point that he was not good at sharing power with CEO, but he still resisted becoming Tesla's CEO himself. 16 years later, he would be the self-installed chief of 5 major companies, but in 2007, he thought that he should be like almost every other CEO and stick to one company. In his case, SpaceX. So he tapped a Tesla investor, Michael Marks, to be an interim CEO. Musk had been the CEO of Flextronics, an electronics manufacturing service company, which he turned into a highly profitable industry leader by pushing a strategy that Musk liked: vertical integration. His company took end-to-end control of multiple steps in the process. Musk and Marks got along well at first. Musk, who had the odd habit of being the world's wealthiest couch surfer, would stay at Mark's home when he visited Silicon Valley. We'd have some wine and shoot the breeze, Mark said, but then Marks made the mistake of believing he could steer the company rather than just carry out Musk's wishes. The first clash came when Marks concluded that Musk's development to reality-defined schedules meant that supplies were ordered and paid for, even though there was no chance they would be used to build a car anytime soon. Why are we bringing all the materials in? Marks asked at one of his first meetings. A manager replied, because Elon keeps insisting that we will be shipping cars in January. The cash flow for these parts were bleeding Tesla's coffers, so Marks canceled most of the orders. Marks also pushed back on Musk's harsh way of dealing with people, A naturally friendly person, Marx was known for his polite and respectful manner toward colleagues, from the janitor to top executives. Elon is just not a nice person and didn't treat people well, said Marx, who was appalled that Musk had not even read most of his wife Justine's novels. This wasn't just a matter of necessities, it was affecting Musk's ability to know where the problems were. I told him that people won't tell him the truth because he intimidates people, Musk says. He could be a bully and brutal. Musk still wrestles with whatever Musk's brain wiring, his ingrained personality, and what he calls his Asperger's can explain and even excuse some of his behavior. Might it even be beneficial in some ways when it comes to running companies where the mission is more important than individual insensitivities? He's somewhat on the spectrum, so I think he's somewhere on the spectrum, so I think he honestly doesn't have any connection with people at all, Mark says. Musk counters that being on the other extreme can be deliberating for a leader. Wanting to be everyone's friend, he told Marx, leads you to care too much about the emotions of the individual in front of you rather than caring about the success of the whole enterprise, an approach that leads to a far greater number of people being hurt. Michael Marx would not fire anyone, Musk says. I would tell him, Michael, you can't tell people they have to get their shit together, and then when they don't get their shit together, nothing happens to them. A difference in strategy also emerged. Marx decided that Tesla should partner with an experienced automaker to handle the assembly of the Roadster. That flew in the face of Musk's fundamental instincts. He aspired to build gigafactories where raw materials would go one end and the cars would come out the other. During their debates over Marx's proposal to outsource assembly of the Tesla, Musk became increasingly angry, and he had no natural filter to restrain his responses. That's just the stupidest thing I've ever heard, he said at a couple of meetings. That was a line that Steve Jobs used often. So did Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos. Their brutal honesty could be unnerving, even offensive. It would constrict rather than encourage honest dialogue. But it was also effective at times in creating the jobs called a team of A players, who didn't want to be found fuzzy thinkers. Musk was too accomplished and proud to put up with Musk's behavior. He treated me like a child, and I am not a child, he says. I'm older than he is. I also run a $25 billion company, he soon left. Marx concedes that Musk turned out to be right about the benefits of control in all aspects of the manufacturing process. In a more conflicting way, he also wrestles with the core question about Musk, whether his bad behavior can be separated from the all-in drive that made him successful. I've come to put him in some category as Steve Jobs. Same category as Steve Jobs, which is that some people are just assholes, but they accomplish so much that I just have to sit back and say, that seems to be a package. Does that, I ask, excuse Musk's behavior? Maybe if the price the world pays for this kind of accomplishment is a real asshole doing it, well, it's probably a price worth paying. That's how I've come to think about it anyway. Then after a pause he adds, but I wouldn't want it to be that way. When Marx left, Musk recruited a CEO he felt would be tougher. Zeev Drori, a combat-tested Israeli paratroop officer who had become a successful entrepreneur in the semiconductor business. The only person who could actually agree to the CEO of Tesla was someone who was afraid of nothing, because there was a lot to be afraid of, Musk says. But Drori did not know anything about making cars. Okay. But Drori did not know anything about making cars. After a few months of delegation of senior executives led by J.B. Straubel said that he would have trouble continuing to work for him, and Ira Othenpraise, a board member, helped convince Musk to take him over himself. I've got to have both hands on the steering wheel, Musk told Drori. I can't have two of us driving. Drori gracefully stepped aside, and Musk became the official CEO of Tesla, and the fourth with that title in about a year, in October of 2008.